Hello, everybody. I'm back. Boy, that was interesting and chaotic, wasn't it? But at the same time, we did manage to get things handled. So and got on the air a little bit faster than we anticipated. So good that happened as well. As a matter of fact, I'm actually checking the stream right now as we are cycling through it. There we go. So in any event, just making sure that I was live as well. So here we are. Finally, we're back and talking. Thanks again for coming over. I know, yeah, we only have a couple dozen currently. Hopefully, some more will join us here soon. But thanks for hanging in there. No idea what caused all of this, but my producer set up a brand new stream in record time and managed to get it up and running, and that's pretty miraculous. So once again, all the thanks to my hardworking producer in Yorkshire. So here's why I'm becoming concerned about what's going on with spaceflight. I've been over here in this country for some time now, and I already released a video about this topic, but I'm starting to see this kind of duplicated in a lot of places. I'm seeing lots of promises, lots of plans, lots of assurances, and yet a lot of things aren't happening. Now, I'm not saying that there's any sort of conspiracy amongst these people to, lie to us or mislead us or anything like that. Only that we are starting to encounter problems and issues in private spaceflight as well as public spaceflight that's putting the entire industry at risk. Let me give you a couple of examples. Two of the big emerging names in private spaceflight lately: Rocket Lab and Virgin Orbit. All right, two big names, both of whom have had a great deal of success in sending things to orbit and such. If you check their earnings reports that they put out every quarter, you're seeing a lot of big negative numbers. Now, again, when we're talking about technology, when we're talking about new developments, new innovations, and I encountered this a lot in the telecommunications arena, companies ran in the red all the time as well when they were first emerging. They always have to borrow far more money than they're making. But that problem doesn't seem to be getting any better. At some point, a company does need to start turning that corner and start heading more towards a profit margin than being in the red. And that doesn't seem to be the case with Rocket Lab, and especially with Virgin Orbit. And that's a cause for concern, because this is a couple of companies that have had a lot of success. They've actually gotten to orbit several times, many times actually, with Rocket Lab, and a great deal of success with Virgin Orbit as well. And yet they are struggling. Virgin Orbit, especially if Virgin Orbit and Rocket Lab were not supported by billionaires, Peter Beck and Richard Branson, then they could be in real trouble. Both of those billionaires have the ability to feed an infusion of cash into their little companies. But what about all the rest of these companies? What, about the ABLs of the world, or Skyrora, or Rocket Factory Augsburg, or, I mean, there's so many of them, just hordes of them, both in Spain. Of course, we've got Astra really, I think, should have gone under if it wasn't for all the private funding they've been getting and all the military support. Given the number of failures that they've experienced, I'm actually surprised that they are still afloat. We have quite a few that seem to be showing promise, seem to, have all these plans, for future success, and yet they don't seem to materialize. And even for the companies that are having some success, even they are not running in a very strong position financially. They, as I said, running substantially in the red. And I encountered this very same situation in the broadband telecom arena. There was a time when everybody wanted to get into broadband, right? I mean, everybody saw the huge, profit that could be made in competing in the broadband arena. I worked for a couple of different companies that were competing, in broadband. We're making lots of sales, had tons of customers, and yet we're still way in the red, way in the red. And that's something that could not be sustained. And actually, the companies that I worked for, all of them went under, all of them. And now we're kind of down to these big behemoths again. Those are the only ones that survived, are these giant, multinational corporations that are providing the broadband. The little guys, I mean, they still exist, but the little guys that used to provide this kind of competition, it's not there as much anymore in the telecom arena. And I'm becoming concerned that that is what's developing in spaceflight as well. And it's not just the little guys either. It's not just the people who are shooting, small sats, CubeSats, etc., into orbit. It's also people like, ULA. I mean, think about it. Think about what kind of trouble ULA potentially is in right now. Vulcan Centaur is the focus, the key stone upon which ULA's future success is entirely built. If something goes wrong with Vulcan Centaur, or if it's delayed for another year, year and a half, that company is in deep trouble, actually in significant danger of going bankrupt. They have a number of launches still planned for Atlas V, but everything else is pretty much gone. And, they desperately need Vulcan Centaur to go. What happens if it doesn't? You're looking at one of the biggest spaceflight companies in the world, either struggling financially, possibly going bankrupt, possibly going under. And, in a scenario like that, if you have a big major power player like ULA go under, that takes a lot of confidence away from the entire industry. Investors all over the world are going to get scared about the prospect of investing in spaceflight if something like that happens to ULA. Now, we would like to think that even that SpaceX is completely, SpaceX is completely, invulnerable to this, that there's no way anything could ever possibly happen to SpaceX. But once again, we can't say that for certain either. Of course, no company is invincible, but in addition to that, they are relying a lot on Starlink. Starlink is and Elon Musk himself has said it. If something goes south with Starlink, if Starlink does not come through the way they are talking, then there's serious problems developing on the horizon for SpaceX. Their level of profitability may start to evaporate as well. We've seen one Falcon 9 after another, after another, after another fly out of Cape Canaveral and also out of California for SpaceX. But most of those flights, or a lot of those flights, are dedicated towards Starlink deployment. Think of all of the money that SpaceX is sinking into Starlink and the manufacture of the satellites in launching them. I mean, so many of them. I mean, every time you turn around, you have a Falcon 9 flying up to orbit, deploying more of the things. That is a huge crapshoot that's being taken right now by Elon Musk to make sure, the network work, is effective. Now, it does appear to be working fairly well, but it needs that version 2 satellite to be profitable. Elon himself has said that it needs that version 2 satellite that cannot be carried by Falcon 9. There's a scaled down version that they're talking about, maybe deploying a few of them as a stopgap measure, but they need Starship in order to deploy those version 2 satellites. And so far, we still can't say for certain that Starship's going to fly. Now, before, Starship was this big, this big dream that Elon had of going to Mars and deploying huge amounts of payload with Starship. But the future of SpaceX still looked really solid, regardless of what happened to Starship, because Falcon 9 had all these customers. Falcon Heavy has all these military customers. Rockets we know work, we know are effective. Those have more customers than they know what to do with. So SpaceX looked really, really solid for a long time. Not as much now. And again, that's because of the Starlink gamble. Now, am I saying this is a bad gamble? No. I think that the reason that Elon Musk is as successful as he is because of these kinds of gambles. By the way, Anders Bo Christensen, thank you. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate your support. Like I say, it's this kind of support that allows me to bring you all the content that I have been lately. I'll tell you what I've been able to build over here is astonishing. All the connections, all of the people in the UK Space Agency, and a huge number of different private UK space companies and spaceports. I mean, my God, in the last two months and 10 days, I built a colossal network over here that I couldn't have done without your help. And so all of these super chats and PayPal donations, Patreon, all of that has made this possible. I would have had to go home a long time ago without this. So, guys, thank you so much for everything you've been doing. Thank you for sustaining this over here because it's made a huge difference. However, all of that having been said, my decision to come over here has been a very positive thing from being a journalist because I've been able to cover things in great detail that nobody else has been willing to cover, really. There not a whole lot of other people have been willing to go and do these in-depth interviews with all these people, but these videos have not been very popular. And so, from a financial standpoint, this has been one of the worst decisions I've ever made, simply because the videos that I create, and I understandably so, they're kind of a niche, interest. Not everybody's excited about it. I get that. So on that side of things, it's been kind of a crapshoot for me too. Definitely positives and negatives in that. And let me tell you something, I'd be in much, much worse shape if it wasn't for you guys' help. So thanks so much for all of that. You guys have made this content happen, and I intend to bring you as much as is humanly possible in the time that remains to me. And I think you can tell that given the fact that I released 2 normal videos today and I'm doing a live stream at the same time. That's my dedication to you guys as a thank you for everything that you have done. Thank you so much, Boyd. Really do appreciate that. Seeing the connections and the access develop has been hugely impressive. Thank you, Andy. Really do appreciate that. By the way, I had a chance to thank you very much to Andy Law. He arranged one of our meetups yesterday, kind of got everything set up at a restaurant that we went to and such. We only had 3 people in the end, but that was great because we had a wonderful conversation. All the meetups I have had here, by the way, have been wonderful. I've had an opportunity to meet a huge variety of people from all different walks of life, all of whom love my content. And I'll tell you, it moves me. It really does that so many people like what I do. Blows my mind. So thank you very much for that. Let's see here. Yes, UK and European space, super important, says Antonym. Thank you very much. Really do appreciate that. Soviets never went to the moon other than robots after some spectacular failures are close to fixing all the kinks. I could see something happening to SLS if it failed. Yeah, that's another thing I haven't even touched on, by the way, is NASA and SLS. Think about it for a minute. And, where are we with that? Artemis is a very, very fragile program. Very fragile right now. It's a program that if SLS blows up on the pad, if it gets lost out in space, if it has a serious malfunction, something like that, that could be it for the whole damn program. That could stop it cold. And think about how many other companies are creating things for Artemis. For example, Astrobotic and their Peregrine lander, which, by the way, won one of those Time Magazine greatest inventions of the year. And that was deserved, by the way, unlike SLS. But I mean, the Astrobotic is doing a lot of things for Artemis. It isn't just that one mission. They're going to be sending missions looking for water ice on the moon, all sorts of things. And it's not just them. There are a number of companies involved in the CLPS or Eclipse mission, these initial robot scouts that are being sent to the moon to prep for human landings and all that. If SLS goes kaboom, the whole thing could be over. And all of those companies and all the money they've spent and the contracts that they have, I mean, they may be able to complete those contracts, but their future is going to be in serious jeopardy if NASA suddenly stops spending money on Artemis. But then that's another problem with Artemis. Artemis, what's the real goal here? Because so much of what people talk about with Artemis is the technology, the equipment, the missions, but what's our overall goal? Yeah, we talk about moon to Mars. Okay, I get that. And actually, we were discussing it last night during our meetup. There's an old military adage that a fellow at the Space Guard Center taught me. By the way, if you haven't seen those Space Guard episodes, watch them. You will learn so much about near Earth objects, how we track them, the danger that they present, that sort of thing. This guy had about 25 years in the UK military on the artillery side, missiles, that sort of thing. That's his background. But what he said is the military adage, until you test it, it does not exist. Until you test it, it does not exist. And that's a very important thing to keep in mind for anything that we're trying to accomplish in space. We can talk about all of the amazing things that Starship is going to do. We can talk about all the amazing things that Vulcan Centaur is going to do. We can talk about all the missions that are going to fly out of Spaceport Cornwall, that are going to fly out of Skyrora. None of that exists. None of it until we do it. So that may be what Artemis is all about. That's really what the government should be telling all of us. That's really the emphasis that we should be getting is we can't go to Mars until we prove that we can survive in interplanetary space. And the moon, for all practical purposes, is interplanetary space in terms of cosmic rays, radiation, the distance from the Earth to the moon, the difficulty in trying to get a rescue mission there, all of those sorts of things make it kind of like interplanetary space. And until we prove that human beings can survive and that we are capable of sending sustained human missions, not just putting out flags and such, but missions that stay put for a month or longer, either in lunar orbit or on the lunar surface. Until we prove that we can do that, it does not exist. And so, therefore, I think that that's a pretty good plan. Let's prove that we can carry out interplanetary travel. Let's experiment and practice and perfect interplanetary travel with the moon first. And then once we've mastered it, once we're good at it, once we are accustomed to all of the things that can come up, things that we may not have anticipated, once we've learned how to protect ourselves from cosmic rays, from solar radiation, the sorts of things that are the most likely to kill our astronauts, once our astronauts are able to survive in a remote location that's tough to reach, once they have done all of these things, then and only then are we really, really prepared to go to Mars. Now, there are people who would argue the opposite, that we can go to Mars without all that. I get that. But at the same time, I think that if there's a good argument for it, at least, and that NASA and the government needs to be emphasizing that that is the point, that a mission to Mars is impossible until we master interplanetary travel. And it's a lot easier to master interplanetary miles to the moon as opposed to tens of millions of miles to Mars. So I think that that's, a message that needs to be conveyed, and it isn't. Instead, they talk about, oh, this is Artemis, and we're going to have SLS and Artemis 1 and Artemis 2 and the first woman on the moon. I think it's great to have the first woman on the moon, but that's very secondary, a very secondary mission to the overall objective of mastering interplanetary travel to get to Mars. Now, once again, I'm not going to minimize the importance. I'm one of the biggest advocates for including everybody in space. I mean, regardless of gender, regardless of race, racial heritage, everybody needs to be included so the whole human race gets engaged in this. I'm totally behind that, but that is not the main reason we're doing it. We're not doing this so a woman can finally walk on the moon. That's not our motivation here. We're not doing this so that, I mean, yes, it was terrible back in the day that only white males did it, and that needs to be changed, but that's not the main reason we're doing this. We're doing this so we can go to Mars and we can go to places beyond Mars. And we can't do that until we learn how. And as I say, many people could argue against that. Many people are about the Mars direct first, let's go to Mars first, etc. We don't need the moon. That's fine. An argument can be made for that. But since NASA has decided to take this path, then they should be telling us about it. They should be hammering this into our heads that this is their objective. This is their mission. This is what they intend to accomplish. We're not getting that. We're not getting that consistency of message from NASA. They seem kind of confused. And that is not good at all. That's not good at all. And we're not the only game in town either. The only people who are trying to get to the moon, obviously. You have the People's Republic of China trying to accomplish this as well. What's their objective? What do they want to accomplish? They're not saying. I know that they have a solid goal. There's no question about that. And it may not be a goal that we're terribly thrilled about, but they have a goal. They have a plan. They're just not advertising it because they don't have to, but they have a plan. Our plan is not as well defined. So, this is yet another aspect of what, could be wrong with spaceflight right now, what is putting it at risk at the moment. We just don't have a solid enough push, a solid and determined enough push as we did back in the 60s to accomplish this. Think about SLS and the fact that it's taken 18 years to get to this point, twice as long as it took us to go from, we choose to go to the moon because it's hard to, that's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. It's about 9 years as opposed to 18. And even so, we're still not going to be putting people on the moon with Artemis 1. It's pathetic. It's inexcusable. And I don't think I'm the only one thinking this. I think that there's plenty of people in the government who are looking at these billions of dollars we're spending on this project and saying, what are we doing here? I mean, what are we really accomplishing? Why are we spending all this money? And I'm telling you something. If one thing goes wrong on this mission, if something goes wrong with SLS, it could be in deep trouble indeed. What exploded in the thumbnail? That was a Falcon 9 blowing up in 2016. One of the very few failures that Falcon 9 has had. It blew up on the pad and took the payload with it. Actually, that led to SpaceX making a change of policy to where they didn't load up the payload until the last possible moment, because losing that payload was not a good thing for them. They had a couple of nasty mistakes back in the day with Falcon 9. Now they're fantastic. I mean, we all know that. They're practically flawless. But at the same time, as I've mentioned earlier in the video, I don't think that they're invincible. I don't think that they are, that they're not prone to having issues. Starlink, of course, being the biggest issue with that. Also, okay, we have some comments. I'll go ahead and Common Skeptic says hi. Well, hello. China's plan for the moon and Mars is the same for Taiwan and the South China Sea. I agree with you, Ron, completely. Moon is close, worse on cosmic radiation, lower gravity. There are good reasons to have something on the moon first. Yep, SLS is all right after the hurricane. Yep, I'm certainly hoping that was the case. No, nothing recent as blowing up the Falcon 9. It's a solid thing. It was symbolic more than anything else. It's a symbol of the fact that I think that space flight is in trouble. And I've seen a lot of evidence of it. I'm seeing, either companies that can't get off the ground, who can't get to orbit, who are experiencing and struggling mightily, in the face of extreme adversity, or companies who have succeeded tremendously, such as Virgin Orbit and Rocket Lab, who still are not showing very good financials right now. And then, of course, ULA and their situation with Vulcan, I think that they are in very deep trouble. Anything happens with Vulcan, I don't see how ULA can recover from it. And anything happens to ULA, as I mentioned before, we are in serious trouble. And private space flight, as well as government run space flight, both are in trouble. If a huge player like ULA goes under, especially given the fact that I think ULA is doing a lot of things right. I think that reducing cost, they are aggressively chasing after things to be a legitimate competitor to SpaceX. And if they go under, they are the only legitimate competition for SpaceX. And again, that creates a monopoly. Monopolies are never good at all. And as I said before, we may hear some fireworks going off right now. I think people still had some stuff left over from Guy Fawkes, or is Guy? Heck, I don't know when the heck is Guy Fawkes Day. Maybe it was. Maybe it's now. It's Sunday. Oh my God, things are going crazy. Yeah, it was a week ago when Guy Fawkes. I guess people have some stuff left over. Anyway, I don't know. I got confused there about Guy Fawkes Day for a moment. Oh, by the way, in case you're wondering what these are, these poppies, they're symbolic. It's for something called Remembrance Day. Some of you may have noticed a lot of British people wearing these things. It's mostly in regards to World War One, but it also symbolizes people who've fallen in other conflicts. But it's mostly for the casualties of World War One, and not just British. It's grown to expand to everybody who died in that horrible tragedy. My grandfather served in the First World War in 1970. So in any event, I have a little bit of background with that. Hi Q, hello. IQ is with me. And thank you so much for the £5. The Western world needs to go into space. China welded people into their homes during lockdown. Yes, they do, and they're still doing it. By the way, carrying life support on oxygen was problematic. What's SpaceX's proposal? You know something, Jim? We don't know. SpaceX has been very tight-lipped about their life support. Now, NASA is saying that they are well on their way to having a good life support system for the moon. I don't know. Once again, they have not been talking a lot about that. Richard, thank you so much for the $25 Canadian. It means a lot to me. Once again, boy, you guys are supporting us. Again, the support for this channel, it overwhelms me, and it's deeply appreciated. And again, very much needed for the fact that I've been here for well over 2 months. Certainly has not been a cheap endeavor, I'll tell you that. But thanks so much for helping to make this happen. Don't they compete against SpaceX? Starship doesn't have competition. How do you compete against hundreds of starships? You don't. You don't compete against hundreds of starships. But I think it's going to be a long time before they have hundreds of starships. I really do. Once again, we got to talk about Elon time and Elon's tweets. I've made videos about that. I think that what Elon says will eventually come true, but I don't think it's going to come true as rapidly as we're thinking. I think Starship, its massive exclusion zone, all the complications in launching a Starship, it's going to be tough to get a really, really solid ongoing cadence of a rocket of that size. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's going to take some time. Plastic Pinocchio, thank you so much. Really do appreciate it. Brady says when he passes ULA every day on the drive to Denver, wishes them luck. There needs to be pressure on SpaceX regardless of form. You're definitely correct about that, Brady. As a matter of fact, when you do wish ULA luck, there are people I know there. Just so you know, I've got some friends at ULA in that location. Glenn Buchanan says SLS is a bad attempt to do something challenging on the cheap, hasn't been cheap, but if it succeeds. Very true, Glenn. Absolutely true. SLS, I'll tell you, if Artemis succeeds, it will succeed in spite of SLS, not because of SLS. There are so many things that are screwed up with that rocket. Could it do the job for the next few missions? Yes. If it works properly with Artemis 1, that's a big if. But if it does, then yeah, we definitely have something to a possibility there. Mars Embassy, hey, thanks so much. By the way, guys, Mars Embassy, one of my oldest friends since I started my channel. He's one of the oldest viewers of this channel. Really do appreciate your support. He's got his own YouTube channel as well. He just kind of tracks what's going on, has a camera pointed over at the tanks, like a lot of other folks. So in any event, do you think Elon buying Twitter is a bad diversion for him? 92, thank you so much for bringing that up. Yes, it is. I'm just going to flat out say it. It's a bad diversion. Now, is he going to be able to fix Twitter and make it into a better thing? Yes. I think it's very possible. Elon is very good at fixing things. There's no question about that. I like a lot of his ideas. And yeah, I think that he could make Twitter into something better. But the thing of it is, that's a Herculean effort. It's like the python swallowing the elephant. I mean, that is going to be a full-time job, fixing Twitter. And he's doing it in the face of a lot of opposition, too. A lot of opposition. So he has taken on a massive task. Excuse me. And honestly, I'm kind of concerned that the guy got bored with SpaceX. Keep in mind, it's been 18 months now since anything's flown out of Boca Chica. I think he may have lost some interest in what's going on there because things aren't moving as fast as he's accustomed to going, right? Elon's used to launching rocket after rocket, blowing things up left and right. RUD is part of his whole methodology. He can't have an RUD with a full stack. A full stack RUD is really going to mess up his plans. So things have to move a lot more slowly out of Boca Chica, as we have seen, and as he has admitted recently. And I do believe that Elon, in the face of all of these delays, his mind wandered to other things. And yeah, he's taking on a huge task here. And sure, it's worthwhile. Fix Twitter. I mean, there are so many people who use it. It's such a massive medium for communications, but I don't see how he can keep his eye on the ball with Starship and Twitter at the same time. That would be a tough thing. So in any event, Starship probably going to be ready before Gateway is ready. What's my perspective on that? Lunar Gateway, I think they need to get that thing deployed. I don't see, I think there needs to be a greater sense of urgency with Lunar Gateway. I do not believe that Starship is going to be a good lunar base, an orbital lunar base. I think that it's a waste. It's a reusable vehicle. It's supposed to be used multiple times, and that's what makes it effective. You put it up there, sure, it's got huge fairing, lots of space to be an orbital base, but keep in mind, that's only about 1/3 of the rocket or less. The rest of it, fuel tanks, engines, all of that goes to waste if you convert it into a base, unless you rip out the fuel tanks, rip out the engines, all of that, which is a huge task in lunar orbit to do that. I'm still not a big fan of that, and honestly, neither was NASA. SpaceX put forward a proposal for a Starship space station that competed against, for example, Orbital Reef, the Axiom space station, etc. And it didn't get very good scores. You can look it up at some point if you like, as to how NASA rated it. And there's a lot of things that they said were not fully developed in SpaceX's plans. In some ways, I think SpaceX just kind of threw the proposal at them to see what they might think about the idea. Lunar Gateway 2024, 5 or 6, I think it can be deployed in 2024. I see no reason why it can't, aside from the fact that it just takes forever because things take forever. But honestly, I think we need to get that thing deployed as rapidly as possible. I think not having it deployed is depriving ourselves of extremely important logistics in lunar orbit. But that's a topic for a different video. We're going to go ahead and wrap things up. So once again, in conclusion, Thanks, guys, very much for tuning in, by the way. Deeply appreciate everything you've been doing to support this channel, to support everything that I've been doing. Once again, the super chats and PayPal and Patreon, that's what's kept me going through all this. So thank you very much. But yes, I do believe that we are potentially in a vulnerable position when we're talking about spaceflight. Too many companies, either their objectives being hopelessly delayed or running into financial problems, even the successful ones running into those problems. And nobody seems to be exempt from it, not even SpaceX. That's a situation that I think can be turned around. I think that, with enough effort and enough investment and enough success, we can definitely turn that situation around. But most importantly, government needs to get the hell out of the way of all of these companies' success. So organizations like the CAA, FAA, and others need to stay the hell out of the way of these companies because they have enough to contend with without government bureaucracy making things even more difficult. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until the future of spaceflight is absolutely secured, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.